people have this mindset that I have to work at something until it's fixed, but I think that's the wrong way of looking at it. I think you need to work at something and just put quality practice at it. Okay, so what do you feel is holding you back from improving? Lack of focus during games and autopiloting. All right, talk to me a little bit about that.
I think part of this is just because it's so late at night and I've been working and I'm just tired, right?
Yeah.
But what ends up happening, and inevitably, is like, all right, I'll sit down. I'm like, today I'm working on staying in cover and target focus. Priority, right?
Right.
And then about halfway through the match or so, that just goes out the window and I just start autopiloting.
Yeah. So like basically where you're at is you're like, okay, so I initially start off with this focus, but then as time goes on, I'm noticing, and then all of a sudden I've noticed I'm not focusing at all. So I give myself a kick in the pants, right? And I'm like, oh, and then this starts to happen again, right? So the reason why that happens is as you already said, is you can only go as far in this direction, staying focused, as much gas that you have in the tank, right? If this is our little gas tank right here, by the end of the day, you're tired, you're a working guy and you've got kids and you're working it for a couple of hours, it's late at night, there's not gonna be much gas in the tank. So basically, here's what it is. The best way that I can kind of describe it for you is to spend the gas that you have wisely. Like if you're on a deserted island and you only had a couple of gallons of gas, what would you use it for? Would you use it to start an initial fire so that you could get the driftwood, if the wood was wet, so that you'd have dry wood for tinder to start future fires, right? Would you use it to alert, a plane flying over, but you would have to like really, really be specific about when and where you would want to use it. So when you talk about I'm already really tired and I'm trying to focus on a couple of things at a time, you need to be like super aware that there is only so much attention and focus that you have. So here's my recommendation. You're saying, okay, I want to work on this and I want to work on this. But what you're doing when you're saying that is you're splitting up your lines into 2 lines, right? Which means if you have 2 goals in the middle of the game, neither of those goals are going to be getting quite as much focus and attention as they could be getting, which means that the intensity and focus given to them it's gonna just drop off a lot faster, right? So if you're saying, what were the 2 things that you gave for an example?
Target priority and cover usage.
Right. So what I want you to do instead of us doing this, because I want you to instead redo this drawing and pick one. What one would be more of a priority for you right now?
I'd say probably cover.
Okay, so
I push out past cover too much sometimes and get killed.
Right. So at least in theory, if we're only focusing on cover usage instead of target priority, holy cow, this eraser's terrible. Then if our line should look a little more like this. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
You see it goes further. Now, this works in application, right? This works in application in anything, physical, mental, anything. If you give yourself something a little bit more specific, it's easier to remind yourself, and you're not feeling like you're running 2 engines at once. The other thing that you can do to make yourself last a little longer is here a little trick that I learned is to give yourself the 2 or 3 fight rule. This is a very vague approach, but you can apply it however you'd like. So what it says, okay, you're only gonna have so many quote unquote reps in the tank at this time of the day. So when you instead of saying, I'm gonna focus on cover usage, say, I'm gonna focus on cover usage for the first 2 fights. So the first 2 fights I load into the game, I'm fully focused on cover usage number 1. There's fight number 1, okay? We die, we win, whatever. I focus on cover usage number 2, right? You got me? And then we die or we lose, and then I don't really care what happens the rest of the game. I don't even care. Maybe I work about cover, or maybe I don't. But the reason why that's important is because you're giving yourself, again, full attention, full focus for the 2 fights, because I can remember for 2 fights. And then the next game comes around, and what do you do again?
2 fights.
2 fights again, because even if you're tired, you can always do 2 fights. And what that will do is it will allow you to focus specifically for a period of time. And that's better practice than trying to just keep going. Did you ever play sports in high school?
I did, yeah.
Right. Do you ever run wind sprints?
I was a goalie, so
okay,
so
yeah, you're lucky. So I played high school football, and we'd run wind sprints, and it's like one of the worst inventions in the history of man, where they just make you run and run and run and run. And what would happen is I was like the try-hard good kid. I grew up in a good household, and parents loved me and told me to work hard, right? So what I do in the wind sprints is I'd run as hard as I could. and then I run as hard as I could again, and then run as hard as I could. And basically what ended up happening is inevitably the line started dipping and dipping and dipping because I was legitimately, my arms were going numb. I was running so hard. You know what I'm saying? And it was losing value the further and further I went. I was getting exhausted. But the other kids, you know what the other kids did? Other smarter kids, maybe a little bit lazier than I would, they'd do this. They'd start running at an angle. They'd start running at like 60%. And they just kept running at 60%. You kind of see what I'm saying? And so the gap between me and them would close and close and close. I was a fast kid, but by the end, I was not a fast kid. And that's kind of what you need to be looking at here, where it's like, I'm going to sprint with my focus for the first 2 fights and then just let the rest go, because the sprint is what brings adaptation. If you're not fully focused, you're not going to improve. Not at your level.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So you need to give it everything you've got. Like if the coach has said, guys, we're going to run as 2 sprints as fast as you can, and then we're just going to walk, and then we're going to run 2 sprints in 5 minutes, I would have killed everybody, and everybody as a whole would have run a lot harder and gotten faster because they would have really focused on that 1 sprint or that 2 sprint. But they don't, and that's why, you know, a lot of high school coaches, no offense, are idiots. But you can change that with how you're approaching here. Don't worry about being focused for 2 hours. Be focused for 2 fights, and to do that 3 or 4 or 5 times over the course of the evening. Does that make sense?
No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Okay.
For sure.
And like that's obviously not optimal, but that's what you're working with right now, and I think that's optimal given what you have, because that's just the nature of, you know, being an adult. Other things that you have to worry about.
Right.
And you can adjust that as you want. You know, maybe there's like every King of the Hill round, right? You focus for just 1 fight, the first fight for positioning. Maybe it's like, all right, 2 fights feels kind of easy, or maybe honestly, I'm really tired. I can only focus for 1 fight at a time, and I'll remind myself that the defense or the attack to focus on another fight. I don't know. You know, you get the concept, so you apply it however you want.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense.
But the autopiloting is like you said, you're aware that it's an issue, but there's just not a lot you can do about it besides getting a little bit more sleep and having little strategies like these. One of the detail that I always bring up in my sessions that I highly recommend is to take a break between every single game, even if it's just to get up and grab some and bubble aggression, right? And then finish with right click and play cover consistently, stick to a wall. So you got like, I feel like 4 little tidbits that are very actionable, very memorable, that you can work at in game, 1 at a time. You could do, and the thing is if you apply the sprint based mindset that we talked about earlier, you don't have to pick one thing and work on it for 2 or 3 weeks. You could pick one thing and work on it for 1 game, and then the next game you sprint with another tech, and the next game you sprint with another tech. Like for example, the first 2 fights you focus on your positioning your cover permanently. The next 2 fights you go, oh wow, we have a Reaper now, I'm gonna make sure I bubble his aggression. And then the third fight or the third game you're like, I don't know, let's make sure that I'm playing my beam range, right? And then you're like, all right, at the end of the night I'm gonna work on finishing with right click, just build some of that. You kind of see what I'm saying? Yeah. I think like doing that will kind of keep things fresh without smashing your head over and over. People have this mindset that I have to work at something until it's fixed, but I think that's the wrong way of looking at it. I think you need to work at something and just put quality practice. You might not, tracking that you've improved at it is important and definitely helpful, but I wouldn't even necessarily say you need to improve at it to move on. I think, and also it's right, exactly. It's also a lot less boring. Personally, I think I used to work on something for like 2 weeks straight, like positioning or something like that, and I would just be so bored. And when I'm bored, you're not practicing. You're not focused, right? It needs to be something different. Okay.